Good evening and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm your host, Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. Joining me again is my co-host, Alex Suarez. And tonight, our guest is my friend and former guest on Uncivil Disobedience, exvangelical theologian and minister Jory Micah.
Hey,
Introduce yourself for folks who may not have caught your first appearance, please.
yes. Well, like you said, I am Jory Micah, and basically, I've left the evangelical institution and started challenging a lot of those philosophies, and became kind of like a typical like neoliberal Democrat in the process against Trump, and then in the process after that, I kind of just like became a leftist and met all of y'all on Twitter, basically.
I remember that part of it.
Yeah, it was fun.
It is.
Jory, I wanted to ask you. Recently, I said on Twitter when it was asked, "What would Jesus do if he entered a megachurch today?" I said he trashed the place,
Yeah,
and that, of course, relates to righteous indignation.
absolutely.
So, you, as somebody who's both now a Christian and a leftist, how would you interpret what righteous indignation is through the manifestation of Jesus?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, when we see Jesus trash, the political and religious establishment of the time, because they were very much related. Then we see him trash property, but at the same time, like we never see Jesus hurt humans or animals or anything violent. There are some people that will say that Jesus has whipped people and things, but you don't see that in the text. At least I don't. I've never seen
Well,
that in the text.
it does say that he scourged them from the temple, and scourged them from the temple has a really specific meaning in the King James Version.
And what does that mean?
Well, scourging someone means scourging someone from someplace means you're literally whipping them, and their choice is to stand there and get whipped or run away.
Okay, I've never heard it that way before, to be honest.
In all interpretations that I've seen, him and the disciples were breaking up chairs and tables and
Yes.
getting rid of what they saw as corruption in the temple, physically getting rid of it, actually reacting to its presence there by basically trashing the place, what some might even call vandalism.
Sure.
And so there are some Christians that say that destruction of property, especially when it represents corruption, that could be justification, that it's a type of righteous indignation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't think that it would take a lot of intimidation, I guess you could say, to get cowards out of the temple.
It's true.
Like I mean, I really don't. I don't think Jesus needed to go in there and start like whipping a bunch of people. I'm pretty sure when Jesus went in there and started flipping tables, everyone was like, psycho, and then they were like, I'm out. Because these weren't like your like brave people of the day.
Well, there was only 12 disciples in Jesus, right? So I don't know how many people were in that particular temple, but it was 13 men that
Also,
walked in
I
and trashed the place.
I will point out at this point that this was during the period where Jesus had actually told his disciples to wear their swords when they went down to Jerusalem. This is the only time that he said that to his disciples.
They were under threat.
Now, when Peter actually used his sword against people coming after Jesus later, Jesus didn't like it. But it's fairly clear he wanted the swords on display for the whole thing in the temple.
That's a good point. So if there was a couple hundred worshipers, 13 men, with swords on them, that's going to scare a lot of them away.
Or 12 men with swords on them and Jesus swinging a belt over his head or something.
Yeah, and a lot of people say, unlike the Old Testament, that the New Testament's against materialism. That's not true. It's actually almost anti-Semitic to say that, because if you look at the golden calf that they were worshiping when Moses was literally getting the commandments in Mount Sinai, when he came back those ones that were worshiping the golden calf, they were destroyed. They were separated. They were no longer part of the tribe. And every time I hear the story of the golden calf, I think of the golden bull that were protected by the police in Wall Street during Occupy, that we would used to go and protest. That's like their own golden calf, how they worship money, how they worship capitalism.
Sure.
And that's actually a pretty good comparison, because in the same way that Christians today claim very loudly to be Christian while following practices that are very much the opposite of what Jesus would do in most situations.
True.
The Hebrews who worshiped the golden calf said they were worshiping the Hebrew God.
Or they weren't real Hebrews according to the Bible, right? They were people that came from the tribe, but they were no longer practicing.
So here's where. So all this other stuff aside, this was you can say Israelites, you can say Hebrews, you can use whatever language you want, but these were people who didn't say, "Oh no, we're not worshiping our God anymore." They're people who said, "This is our God."
Yeah, that represented
this is
God.
The right way to worship our God, and it's those folks who are wrong.
Well, yeah, it's idolatry. It's in the Quran as well.
Yeah.
That stems, of course, from Judaism. It's a huge influence on Islam. I would say Islam's even more similar to Judaism than Christianity. But the idolatry comes from that. But also idolatry can be extended. And Jory, you can touch on this. I'm sure you studied this. Idolatry ties into materialism. Materialism ties into capitalism. If you're using modern language. For example, a lot of people consider Jesus having been an anti-Roman imperialist. Do you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think it's, I mean, Jesus was absolutely 100% a revolutionary. And I think that's what people, he was not like this, like super, super nice person all the time. Like, we have shown him in all the books and stuff. And he wasn't love does not always mean that you're passive and nice. And that's what people have mistaken about Jesus. Like he was not passive in the least bit, there's nothing passive about him. He was continuing.
Well, I heard that Emperor Constantine put two things in the Bible, or at least when he was overseeing the, was it the Council of Nicaea, Chris?
Well, the Council of Nicaea was when they finally agreed on everything.
So there was a few other councils before that.
A couple of councils before that where he tried to preside that didn't go as well.
Right. So I heard that the part where Jesus says, "I'm the only Son of God," contradicts all the other statements that Jesus said, about his disciples, all sons of God. And then there's a part where he says, "Turn the other cheek." They said that was put in by Emperor Constantine, or at least one of his people, to pacify the people that would join Christianity.
Well, Constantine was a politician, not a religious leader. And Constantine's reason for adopting Christianity was because there were three religions in the Roman army that between them were pretty representative of the Roman Empire as a whole. There were Christians, there were worshippers of Sol Invictus, who was the undefeated son, who was one of the official gods of the Roman army.
And the Invictus came from the Greeks originally, right? They just changed the name?
Well, no, Sol Invictus is one of the specifically Roman.
Oh, okay, because I know the Greeks had a lot of influence over their religions. Yeah.
That's exaggerated. The Romans mostly put Greek faces on Roman deities, but the actual Roman religion is very complicated and would be a show all by itself anyway.
Yeah. I mean, when I visited Rome, one of the things that always stuck out to me was when I went into one of the temples, and they pretty much was like, there was just hundreds and hundreds of gods in these Roman temples that people would go in and they would worship these hundreds and hundreds of gods. So Christianity was coming with this whole brand new way of thinking, and it was interrupting the status quo and the empire of that time.
The the Romans. The Romans were innovators, but they were also people who copied other people in order to innovate, like our capitalists today.
Well, the Roman aqueducts came from the Greek island of, was it Santorini? They just refined the aqueducts, but the whole concept of the aqueducts came from Greek island.
So the thing you have to remember when people talk about Western civilization is you're talking about a collection of things that the Greeks stole from all around the ancient Middle East, from Egypt to Babylon, and back to Asia Minor.
So, Chris, what was the third religion among the Roman army?
The third religion was Mithraism, which was a old pagan religion that worshipped. It is very similar to Zoroastrianism in that there was a heroic god who was trying to defend life, and there was a
angry god
who was trying to destroy it.
Yeah, like the Angra god in Zoroastrianism, Angra, where the word anger comes from.
Yes,
there's a lot of Indo-European words. Yeah,
and but yeah, and Mithraism was the third religion.
That's interesting. So he found the best way to pacify the empire was through Christianity, right? Because he didn't actually convert until his deathbed. His mother was a Christian.
The first step was to unify the army. And the way that he unified the army was by saying that Sol Invictus and Jesus and Mithras were all the same God.
That's interesting.
That was the first step. And then the second step later on was to say, it's Jesus who has truly been the actual divine figure all this time, and we've just worshipped him by these other names. And then the final step was to get involved in making Christianity the de facto. He didn't make it officially the official religion yet, but made it the de facto official religion of the empire.
The goddess of fertility, for example, Istar, where the word Easter comes from, was the egg. The egg represented fertility. And of course, we have our pagan Easter customs that come from that, right? And a lot of people that were practicing that, I mean, stemmed from Mesopotamia, but the Romans had similar practices too, right?
It's really worth understanding that the reason all our holidays overlap with pagan holidays is that the priests did that on purpose so they could keep track of who was coming to church. And if you didn't come to church, they went asking around about you to make sure you weren't going to the wrong temples. And really, it's that simple. That was during the authoritative period of Christianity, where the priest might be the most important person in the town.
And also the clergy were permitted to be able to read. The common people were not. Right. So the clergy had a monopoly on the text of the Bible, correct?
Correct.
That was after the
very, very long time.
Yes. Even after the so-called Dark Ages ended, there was still a very long period where the majority of literate people were priests, and there were a handful of nobles.
Was that also
no educated commoners at all?
Was that also true in the Byzantine Empire that practiced Greek Orthodoxy?
The Byzantine Empire was much better educated. The Byzantines thought that the European Christians in the West were barbarian Germans. And this is what I was saying about Western civilization. The Greeks stole this stuff from all over the ancient Middle East. And then the Romans stole it from the Greeks.
The Greeks Hellenized the entire Middle East too, right? So there was Greek influence over the Middle East. This is from the time of Alexander on.
And then the barbarians sacked Rome. And so what we call Western civilization is just what was kept by the barbarians who destroyed Rome.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had the Vandals, the Visigoths, and other Germanic tribes that went down there. And
but even more than that, the Goths ruled Rome for many, many years after it fell. And the Goths were succeeded by Franks, who were also German.
The northern Franks were Germanic, right? And then some of them were Celtic too.
No, all the Franks were Germans.
So you're saying like the Germanic people in Switzerland, that they were considered Frankish?
Well, so there were all sorts of Germanic peoples.
Yeah, I know.
And not all Germanic peoples are Franks, but the Franks were a Germanic people who crossed the Rhine slightly before the big German migration of the Visigoths and Ostrogoths.
You're talking about the Gaelic people, but the Gaelic people, some of them were Germanic, correct?
So the Gaelic people so Celts and Germans are different things.
Oh, I meant Gaul, not Gaelic. Gaul. Gaelic.
Gaul. So Gaul, the Gauls were Celtic. German tribes were trying to move into Gaul for a very long period. One of the reasons that the emperors became emperors is they were able to stop that and keep the Germans out of Gaul unless they worked for the emperors. But then the breakdown came. The Frank crossed the Rhine first and got jobs working for the Romans guarding the Rhine. But then the Franks just let the Visigoths and Ostrogoths across because they wanted to help them get away from the Huns.
So the Rhine River, isn't that part of the land border between France and Germany to this day?
The Rhine is still part of the land border between France and Germany, yes. So let's get out of history and get to what I want to talk about, because we're already eating things up. So some of us remember that not too many years ago, there was a court decision where the Supreme Court said, John Roberts siding with the liberals of all things, the Supreme Court said, no. Gay marriage, the government can't stop gay marriage. Oberfell versus Hodges. And that case changed the way that Republicans were talking for a while. And it was all stuff like bathroom bills and things that people didn't take as seriously as they should have because they seemed silly and petty. But it was really just keeping people energized and on point until they were in a position to declare full-on war again against everybody they didn't like. And now we see a wave of anti-gay laws, anti-trans laws, anti-abortion laws all over any state where Republicans think they can push them through.
Well, recently here in Florida, you have the Don't Say Gay bill that passed, and it's often how it's the narrative on it is, even from those that are opposing it, has often said it's protecting children, this and that. But what they ignore that in the actual law, I haven't looked at the other ones that are similar, but here in Florida, what it actually says is, or any age deemed inappropriate.
Yeah.
So that means under Florida law, if a state college thinks that most of their students who are 20-somethings are too young to know about homosexuality, even there, it's completely legal now for them not to mention it to them. So this is not just about children.
And it's about, it means that people can't go to help for the school counselor, right? Because the school counselor can't talk to them about what they're going through. And there are places where people with a really evangelical family may only have the school counselor to talk to.
And there has been many confirmed cases of suicides. And we know that suicide rate is going to go up, not just in Florida, and many other states throughout the nation. So in a way, it's a form of genocide.
Well, teenagers are disproportionately likely to kill themselves in the first place. Gay teenagers are more likely to kill themselves than the rest of teenagers. And you're doing something that's going to make it harder for gay kids to get mental health that acknowledges their personal...
Or any non-heterosexual child, right? It could be bisexual as well. But, they're being bullied for their sexuality, and they can't even go to a professional to talk about it. And if they come from a religious family, it's very hard for them to talk to their parents about it. So it's making it inevitable that the suicide rates are going to go up.
Your thoughts, Jory?
I have so many thoughts on this. I'm just thinking about how there's so much like conservatives are constantly saying like, let the parents take care of the kids, let the parents take care of their own kids, let the parents do it, let the parents decide when it comes to education and things of that nature. But then they don't let the parents decide about their own kids when it comes to their mental and physical treatment.
Yeah, and that's
where, I mean, that's kind of what you guys are way
they're
smarter.
assuming.
I'm just good at seeing like inconsistencies, you know, where like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you guys know way more than I do. I'm just like trying to listen so that I can see where there's inconsistencies, where it's not, to me, it shows that it's just straight up a dog whistle to and transphobic people.
All in the name of freedom, right?
And
all in the name of freedom. What a way to bring more freedom, right? This is what the right always says, to bring more freedom by censoring what educators can say to children, whether it's critical race theory, whether it's homosexuality, and they're all doing this in the name of freedom, right? It's very Orwellian.
Does anybody remember when a guy who clearly had mental and emotional issues and believed what he heard about Pizzagate went to an actual pizza parlor and tried to shoot the place up?
Yeah, he showed up with an AK-47. He was trying to rescue the kids.
So now...
Oh, I did hear about...
That was during the election, 2016, when Trump was going hard on Pizzagate.
It's freaking crazy.
And so now you've got Republicans screaming at the top of their lungs that teachers are grooming kids in the classroom in states full of people with guns.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to get a gun here in Florida.
Very easy to get a gun in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
They passed a horrible anti-trans law in Texas that stops kids from being able to talk to anyone under any circumstances practically about being trans, on the idea that this is grooming the kids. So you're accusing people of abusing the children of people with guns. What do you expect to have happen? Now, let's also point out, this is not a popular statistic to mention, but who's most likely to abuse kids? Their parents.
Mm-hmm. Family, friends, relatives.
You can't even go to Disney anymore in Orlando, here in Florida, without protesters outside talking about grooming. It's just insane. People can't even go on vacation with their kids now without being hounded by these crazy so-called protesters.
And that yet statistically, the people kids are at the most risk from are their fathers' male relatives, and their father's male friends.
Facts.
And shortly followed by their mother.
The grooming would most likely happen in the household, not in the school.
Yes.
I was reading something the other day about somebody whose daughter was going to an evangelical school. Their daughter came home after something someone said in school and said, "Dad, are all fathers really attracted to their daughters?"
Oh my God.
And the father who was doing the tweeting said, "Where did you hear that?" And she said, "Well, at school." "Who said that at school?" "Well, that was something that the grown-ups at school seem to think is normal."
And also, the right has assured states like Florida, I believe it's 14, as long as you have parental consent, you could be a 30-year-old male and marry or have relations with a 14-year-old girl. And it's the Republicans that assured that those types of laws pass. So that's literal pedophilia if you consider it the law of saying it's 18 that they're advocating for. But no, when it's with gays, you can't accept it.
I thought it was Louisiana, though. No?
it depends what state. Some states is 16, some states is 14, and these are mostly southern Republican states that were pushing for this. In Florida, I believe it's 14. So it's more about finding a way to justify homophobia than protecting children or preventing pedophilia.
Well, in West Virginia, another very conservative evangelical state. In West Virginia, it was a misdemeanor to sell your child until when I was living in Tennessee.
To sell your child for sex?
To sell your child for anything.
Oh, my God.
It was only a misdemeanor to sell your child to someone else and say, okay, you gave me money. This is your kid now. That was only a misdemeanor in West Virginia.
Well, in some states, you can still marry your first cousin. I mean, it's just...
Well, so I'm not going to judge any consenting adults for what they choose to do with one another. And
not even
because it's not my business.
Well, there can be worse thing than marrying your cousin, but I'm just saying that there's these laws that seem kind of medieval to me.
Marrying your cousin only gets really bad if it happens too many times.
Or if you have children.
Getting the kings of Spain.
If the cousins decide to have no children, that's no problem to me. But there can be genetical consequences for having kids when they're that closely related.
See, now I'm going to have to ask people if they've seen Lone Star, and that's going to take us totally off topic.
Was that a movie?
Yes, that's a movie.
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah, see, that's another show by itself.
I'll be right back.
But basically, you have this culture that sees heterosexual child abuse as not really all that weird, but is absolutely terrified of gay people.
But what are we talking about? We're talking about how Democrats are not doing anything about it.
Yes, which they're not. They're not doing squat.
That's the issue.
That's a big part of it, because Democrats are the ones who said, well, this is what Republicans are going to do.
Yeah.
Yes, we know. They're Republicans. That's what Republicans do. What are you going to do about it?
What was that movie again?
You're the campaign and the party that campaigns on all of this stuff. Like, to me, like, I feel like we should hold them even more responsible, because they're the only tiny bit of hope left, if there is any hope left at all, to be honest.
Well, I mean, we still have federal laws that say state governments can't protect people's that state governments can't violate people's civil rights, and it's the federal government's job to protect them.
I looked up like the most absurd laws in the nation, and I believe even acts of bestiality are legal in some southern states. Is that right?
I don't know that.
Yeah, sex between man and animal is legal in some states. That's what some of the laws they showed.
And why is it always? I don't know about that. I'm not going to speculate about that. All I will say is that a few years ago, the homophobic Republicans were saying that if we allowed gay marriage, the next thing we would see is people marrying their animals. So maybe they were talking about...
They were more okay with that, though. That's the thing. You have these Republicans in these southern states that say, man wants to be with his chicken or whatever, that's fine. But no, two men together, two women together, you can't do that.
The chicken cannot consent, y'all. The chicken cannot consent.
Yeah, how's the chicken going to consent? It can't talk.
Well, now, so if you believe the notion that animals are sentient, then it should be possible for animals to somehow signal their consent to you non-verbally. That said, I don't think it's sanitary.
Yeah. It's not. It's not sanitary, and the animals cannot consent. Not until they can speak anyway.
Well, and this is where, beyond whether they can or not, Is it a good idea?
I'm sorry, guys. I just have to say, I looked it up. There's 4 states where it's still legal to have acts of bestiality. Wyoming, West Virginia, New Mexico, and Hawaii.
Wait, what was the first one?
Wyoming, West Virginia, New Mexico, and Hawaii.
Well, Wyoming, I would expect. Hawaii is weird because Hawaii is a really blue state and has been for a long time.
Huh. What do you mean by that, though?
Blue state, Democrat.
In theory, so they're not discriminating, I guess. But
no, most of those states are Republican states. I mean, yeah. West Virginia, Wyoming, right?
Well, Wyoming is the one state where people love their horses more than Texas, right?
What about New Mexico? I know there's progressives in New Mexico. I think it's a combination of far right wingers and progressives.
New Mexico and Arizona are both increasingly center liberal in the urban areas and still reasonably far right out in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, because Bernie did better with the Latinos, and there's about the same amount of Latinos in Arizona as there are in New Mexico. He did better with the New Mexico Latinos because at least for the Latinos, in New Mexico, they tend to be more progressive.
Well, and here's where there's a huge subculture in Southern California, Arizona, and Texas that sort of skips New Mexico, though there are people from the same subculture there. It's just they're not as influential in the community. There is a Latino subculture in Western states, people whose families have been in the U.S. since California or New Mexico or Arizona or Texas came into the U.S. in the first place, who think of themselves as more like their white neighbors than the brown people across the border. The guy who warned Sam Houston that Santa Anna was besieging the Alamo and they were going to fight to the last man and all die to give him time was a Mexican Texan named Juan Seguin.
I'm sure the Mexicans in their historical narrative refer to him as a traitor.
Oh, I'm sure. But it's important to understand that there have always been, going back to plotting to steal Texas from Mexico, there have always been people of Latino descent who have chosen to side with white people.
Wasn't there also Texas was its own republic, so it was a country at one point that was not in the United States or Mexico.
Both Texas and California.
Were the Texan Republicans, some of them also Mexicans that were in that republic that did not consider themselves part of the Mexican nationality?
Well, everybody who was in the ruling class, let's put it that way. Everyone who was in the ruling class of the Texas Republic, whether they were Latino or whether they had come from the United States originally, they all considered themselves Texans, as opposed to Mexicans was the word when they were still independent.
Texicans? Interesting.
Texicans. And it became Texans after Texas joined the Union. But it was Texicans when they were independent.
Very interesting.
Very interesting.
You know, Chris and I have a passion for history, and we love to go off on tangents.
That's all right. You guys, I feel like I'm getting like a free history lesson from professors here.
Well, if you want to bring religion into it, the Irish were being, in the Mexican-American War, repressed for practicing their religion, which was the same religion as the Mexicans. And as a result, large swaths of the Irish fighters, called the San Patricio, which means St. Patrick in Spanish, went and defected to the Mexican side.
Plus, there were what people don't ever remember is there were a whole bunch of Irish people in Mexico even before that.
Well, yeah, I mean, even Simon Bolivar in the early 1800s had, as part of his international brigades from the liberation from the Spanish imperialists at the time in South America, several Irishmen that were fighting along his side.
Bernard O'Higgins was the
liberator of Chile,
son of an Irish father and a Spanish Creole mother.
Yeah, the liberator of Chile,
yes,
who worked with San Martin, who worked with Bolivar.
Yes.
O'Higgins was the son of an Irishman. That's correct.
Yes, and the first, on the other hand, the first president of Ireland was a Cuban American.
I did not know that.
Well, he was all his mother was Irish. His father was Cuban. He was born in New York.
Well, even Che was part Cuban. One of his surnames was Lynch. Che from Argentina, yeah.
Yeah. Well, but that's the thing, is that there were, because Spain was the chief Catholic country in Europe for many, many years, the earls who fled Ireland when Queen Elizabeth was firmly establishing English rule in Ulster went to Spain.
The first head of state of the Cuban Republic was Dominican, too. A foreigner, yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, because all his compatriots that fought alongside him that were founders of what would become the Cuban Republic were killed. So he was one of the few that survived. And even though he was born in Dominican Republic, he fought in the War of Liberation with Martí and others. I'm trying to remember his name. Máximo Gómez. Yeah. So President Gómez was the first president of Cuba when the Spaniards were thrown out. And he had happened to have been born in Dominican Republic.
Well, the first president of Mexico, who shortly thereafter became the first emperor of Mexico before getting thrown out,
It wasn't Benito Juarez, was it?
No, Benito Juarez threw out Maximilian, who was the second emperor.
Yeah, he was part of the Habsburgs.
Yes, he was
the behest of Napoleon II. That's actually when the Bonapartes and the Habsburgs were united.
What's depressing about that is Maximilian was a liberal who wanted to reform the Austrian government, and he was brought to Mexico to be emperor by the most conservative faction of the Mexican government that had chosen to support Napoleon. And he ended up basically getting shot by the sort of people he was he would have tried to help if he had more freedom.
Yeah, the Battle of Puebla on the 5th of May was his ultimate defeat. It looks like her camera went out.
It looks like she dropped off.
She'll be back. She had been having issues where her camera was kind of, I don't know, freezing.
I know they'd been freezing and coming out, so I wonder if her internet didn't drop out. But
well, do you know Benito Mussolini was named after Benito Juarez, who was a progressive. Benito's parents, Mussolini's parents were socialists.
Well, Mussolini was
Mussolini was in his youth, absolutely. Yeah.
But anyway, back to the topic at hand.
Yeah, I'm sure she'll come right back.
The laws, whether it's the abortion stuff in Texas, I just passed a law in Oklahoma making it a felony to have an abortion. Did you catch that?
I did not know about that. No.
Yeah, that's disturbing. They literally made it a felony.
Well, they just passed the anti-abortion law and making it less time to have to report it before you can do it legally in Florida. But to make it as a felony in Oklahoma, that's something that's got to be disputed in the court. That's absolutely absurd.
That's the biggest deal yet. Well, of course, Texas claimed that a woman who had a miscarriage had a self-induced late-term abortion and arrested her for murder.
Oh my God.
And then they ended up admitting that they were wrong and letting her go.
Insane.
Just
it sounds like something out of
traumatize a new mother.
The Spanish Inquisition or something. Do you know that the German and the French Inquisition was actually more, it was, what's the term? It was more broad than the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition only focused on conversos and some moriscos. But the French and the German actually went after people they accused of witchcraft. Well, it wasn't a question of, the ones that stayed behind that converted to Catholicism. They actually wouldn't they accused a lot of people of witchcraft. They were more broad in that sense.
It was the French Inquisition court and not the English that sentenced Joan of Arc to be burned, right?
Yes, it was a regime in France that was like a puppet regime of the British, but yes, it was an inquisitorial court.
It was the Inquisition court.
Yeah,
the French Inquisition. They weren't puppets of the British. They answered to the church.
Weren't the British Catholic back then too?
Yes, they were.
Yeah, so it wasn't a question of Protestant versus Catholicism. They were accusing Joan of Arc of heresy. They considered her a threat for whatever reason.
They captured Joan of Arc and turned her over to the Inquisition.
Right.
And the Inquisition tried her for witchcraft and burned her because they believed that she was a threat to the patriarchal order of the
Even though she helped bring the troops in France to defeat the British, and she was a moralizing force, they considered her a threat against the establishment. That's why they went after her. Well, Jory's back again. Jory, do you know about Joan of Arc? I mean, do you know much about her? You got to put your mic back on. We're talking about Joan of Arc.
You're muted.
Yeah, tell me the context.
Well, we were just talking about how the courts that actually executed her in France, at the behest of the British, they were the inquisitorial courts. They were part of the Inquisition in France.
That's part of the idea that it was at the behest of the British is part of the myth.
Oh, is it that to take away responsibility from the French? Is
to take away the responsibility of the Catholic Church that later sainted her for actual.
Oh, now I see what you're saying. It's ironic because it was a fully Catholic Inquisition. Yeah, I mean the British were Catholics back then too, but yes, I understand now. British, they're trying to cover up the French Catholic complicity in her death.
So the way it worked, because it's really important to be clear, she led the French army. She was captured by the British after a battle. When she was captured by the British, they did not keep her. They did not imprison her. They did not lock her up. They immediately handed her over to the French Inquisition. The Inquisition tried her for witchcraft, convicted her for witchcraft, sentenced her to death, and burned her. The English were not involved in any of that. Now, the English handed her over knowing this was what was going to happen. But it was the Catholic Church that did this because a woman leading the liberation of France in the name of God was a threat to the power of the church as it was constituted at the time.
So quoting Pontius Pilate, the British washed their hands of it.
Exactly. And it's basically the way the French Inquisition treated Joan of Arc was very much how the evangelical church would have very much liked to have treated Jory if they had been able to get away with it for being a woman and a minister.
Absolutely.
But instead, they could only make her life miserable because the United States has laws now about burning witches.
Yes. Well, Jory, I want to understand your transformation, right? Because I love stories of transformation, whether it's Malcolm X or any other figure in history. So I want to hear about your transformation because you started out. I mean, you grew up right-wing evangelical through and through, right? And then suddenly you had an epiphany or something happened in your life, and you started to go the other way, right?
Yeah. Honestly, I think when Donald Trump was supported by over 80% of the evangelical party is when I knew it was my time to get the hell out of there.
Yeah.
Because I started realizing, oh my God, like these people, it wasn't even about Donald Trump. It was about that we heard our entire lives about Bill Clinton being a rapist, which I actually think he is. But
sure.
I mean, we were told
probably just as much as Biden is too.
What? Yeah, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I believe they're all rapists, but that wasn't even the point. The point was that we were told our entire lives, to not support this kind of person that Donald Trump represented in the flesh. So it was it was really the hypocrisy of like, y'all taught us purity culture that's literally ruined a lot of our lives. has damaged a lot of our marriages, has damaged a lot of our relationships, our intimacy. Most of us have some kind of intimacy, sexual issue if we grew up in evangelical culture. Over 50% of evangelicals are divorced. Like there's something going wrong here, where.
Well, in Spain in Franco's time, up till recently, divorce was illegal.
Got his pants down on some yacht. That's an
issue. Oh, God.
Hypocrisy is a real issue.
And even though divorce was illegal there, they lived with their lovers. They're still separated. It didn't prevent anything,
Yeah, exactly. It's continually, it's the hypocrisy. And that's what evangelicals and conservatives and Republicans and all these people continue to fail to understand. They keep trying to want to say, oh, it's Trump, 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 Trump. No, it's the hypocrisy. It's the fact that y'all ruined our lives with this purity shit. And then you wanted to prop up a man who was bragging about grabbing PUSSY. Like, it just makes no sense. And it just showed the true colors of the evangelical movement. And at the end of the day, no matter how it might have started, the way it has finished is a political Republican cult. And I don't want anything to do with that. But
also, why would a woman want to bring that type of attention on herself? Because after he was joking with the Bush cousin about that, and it came out, a woman came forward and said, oh, I was one of those people. Like, that's going to be unwanted attention. The Trump fans are going to be hounding her forever.
Yeah.
So people are saying, oh, she was just saying that for the attention. Nobody wants that type of attention.
Nobody.
No. And who's though, not just Trump, but also Tara Reid, who accused Joe Biden of sexually assaulting her.
Tara Reid knew she was going to be hounded for years as a result. Yeah. There was no reason for her to go forward unless it was true.
She's being invited on like these small little podcasts, no offense, but like what we're doing right now. Like,
well, they're bigger than us.
She was on RT before they shut it down, so those are one of the few outlets that spoke to her.
Meanwhile, like, she's getting nothing out of coming forward out of this. If she would have denied her story, mainstream media would be booking her left and right just to deny the story and go with their delusional narratives. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is on video smelling kids, smelling women, like.
And his son, apparently the pedophile gene. Apparently, the pedophile gene went to Hunter because we already know about the child from the laptop. So of course Epstein was best friends with Bill Clinton.
A lot of information, but I've heard about that too.
Right.
Well, so let's just assume, based on how many people of both parties were on the wild ride to Epstein's Island. Let's say, what if this is what people in both parties and rich people in general and people with power in general are just really like?
What I don't get is, Chris, how many Johns were convicted? 0. Not a single client was convicted that was with these underage girls. And the only person that was convicted was, what's her name? Ghislaine Maxwell?
Ghislaine Maxwell. And of course, right. Jeffrey Epstein died in prison under suspicious circumstances before he was brought to trial.
Exactly.
And so that means the clientele had to be powerful guys. I mean, not even Prince Andrews has been convicted of this.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that, who's going to convict these people? Who's going to charge any of these people with any of this stuff?
Right. And then they're all blackmailing each other with weird pictures and stuff. And weird videos and weird knowledge and all this stuff. I keep trying to bring this up when people are like, why liberals don't understand why they're not prosecuting Trump for all these things, because they have no leg to stand on.
For all we know, the Ukrainians have dirt on Biden and his son and what he did at a party in Odessa or something. And the Ukrainians are blackmailing Biden to do stuff. They talk about stuff like that with Russiagate. There's more evidence actually of Ukraine. And I'm not a Republican by any means. I'm an independent leftist, but there's more evidence now of Ukraine having the potential to have dirt on Biden and his family than anything the Russians had on Trump.
Well, so I don't know about that one way or the other. I have speculation. My speculation is, okay, was Hunter Biden just getting corrupt money when he was on the board of an energy company in Ukraine? Or was he doing something for the U.S. government? And if he was doing something for the U.S. government, what was he doing?
It's pay for play. I mean, it's not just the Clinton mob that does it,
There is a practice in the intelligence community called sheep dipping, where they choose somebody who is either easily framed for or actually guilty of a crime and make sure they get drummed out of the military in disgrace, so they have that much better cover for talking to corrupt or corrupt people or agents of a foreign power.
Who were the first to do it? MI5?
Well, the CIA does it, as far as I know, more than anyone else. But
just as Maxwell's father was MI5, and Epstein had connections to Mossad, they said. So a lot of these people end up having intelligence connections. And then, of course, her father died in mysterious circumstances, too.
It's always hard to know everything about that sort of thing. And what I do know is that lots of powerful people had reason to be worried about Epstein talking about them in too much detail.
He was Epsteined. Right? Yeah.
People like...
Yes.
People like Soledad O'Brien had pictures with people who had pictures with Ghislaine Maxwell or Epstein. So there's all this one degree of separation between the elites who did not participate in whatever was going on Epstein's Island and the elites who did. They still, you have to know that people knew what was going on.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think people ultimately control each other by shame. It's like, no matter what you're ashamed of, maybe you didn't do something as bad as maybe Trump did, but maybe he can still blackmail you with something
that's the real
you're
power
super ashamed of.
That's the real power of purity culture, right? Giving people lots of shame that you can use to control them.
And that's why I'm constantly talking about the importance of authenticity and being real and being transparent and trying. I mean, not that I probably share too much. I've learned that, but like the more integrity you have, the more authenticity you have, the more we really can't lose, like no matter what, you just keep saying what you believe to be true. And if you're coming from like a good heart and a good mind, like it's still going to be better than what a bunch of liars are continuously telling us.
We both cut out for a second. Are you there? Her camera's kind of... Are you there, Jory?
Yes. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you, but your camera's frozen. But keep talking to us, right? I think the audio's okay now.
The audio was good, yeah.
Okay.
You might want to go back and come back in.
I left off.
Oh.
Where were we? Okay, so...
Well, you were saying that sometimes you share too much or something like that, and then from there it kind of went out.
Well, people use shame to control people, and that's what the purity culture is about in the first place. And then she was talking about authenticity.
Oh,
right.
So you heard that part. I didn't.
What? I'm really seeing that this purity culture ideal is really very much happening in the Republican Party. It's very much happening in the Democratic Party. It's very much happening in all sorts of different religions. It's just that the authorities are to decide the purity is. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, no, and what you've got is, and it's international, and it's not just one or two religions. People are talking to each other across all sorts of barriers. But I mean, there's a lot of sympathy between groups like the BJP in India and white supremacist groups in Europe because they hate a lot of the same people.
Yeah, for example, I used to like Tulsi Gabbard, and I used to defend her. I said, well, she needs those Hindu groups, those Hindu nationalist groups money because she doesn't take corporate money. Now I don't defend her at all because there's no reason for her to say these things. She's no longer in office. And she's saying, Islamophobic things, defending drone warfare that we know from WikiLeaks that she used to support Assange that overwhelmingly kills civilians, like 90%. There's no justification for this. She's supposed to have been the anti-imperialist candidate, and here she comes out and says that Islam causes the terror, that we need to drone more.
She's always been Islamophobic. She's always been anti-gay.
Never.
She's always been anti-trans. She was the face of an anti-gay cult as a teenager.
Yeah, but I thought she had changed since then. But I guess there's still some of that in her mentality.
So this is important to understand. She told everybody that her service in the military had changed her, and and she had come to see things differently because of serving with gay people and trans people. And then she said in a private interview with Oz Magazine in Hawaii, well, I haven't actually changed my beliefs. I've changed the way I feel about the law.
Wow.
And so now she's back to being openly anti-trans and openly anti-gay.
Sounds like she loves power more than people.
What was it that Marianne Williamson posted recently? I think it was something that was Russophobic. There's some people that I really liked before that I'm starting not to like now.
Marianne Williamson is all in standing with Ukraine. A lot of people who should know better are all in standing with Ukraine.
And Marianne Williamson, like Tulsi, was a Assange supporter, for God's sakes. But how could they get it so wrong on these other issues?
Marianne Williamson was kind of made anti-Maduro noises about Venezuela when she was asked, remember?
I didn't know that.
She kind of made pro-Israel comments when she was asked at one point. She's got problematic positions on foreign policy because, and this can't be stressed enough, I believe Marianne Williamson has a better heart than most millionaires.
I agree.
And I believe she's genuinely trying to be a good person as she sees it. But ultimately, she is a liberal Democrat who agrees with us on a lot of issues rather than one of us.
Exactly.
I mean, unless they're working outside that party at this point, I mean, there's very few progressive Democrats that are running as Democrats, even in battleground states that are anti-imperialist.
Well,
and for you to be true left, you have to be an anti-imperialist.
There's Jason Call in Washington.
Washington State?
Washington State.
Uh-huh.
There is I hate it when I out of sync.
Well, there's a guy from Maryland that follows me on Twitter that says he's a socialist that's running as a Democrat. But I don't know about his position on imperialism. I have to figure that out.
I know that
he liked one of my posts about Venezuela, but one thing's liking a post, another thing is taking a position.
Yeah, but Jason Call is very anti-imperialist. He's very outspoken, and he's running as a Democrat in Washington State. He's running in a primary against Rick Larson.
For Congress?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
He's a good guy.
Does DSA back him?
Probably not. He's a good guy. I like him. We're friendly.
Yeah.
We've known each other since the 2020 primary. We both have friends in the Medicare for All movement in common.
Well, my friend Adam Christensen, who's a co-founder of Hands Off Venezuela Central Florida.
I don't like Adam Christensen, but I'm glad he's co-founder of Hands Off Venezuela.
Yeah, I was just going to say that he ran for, and I know people that like him, dislike him, but he recently ran for agriculture commissioner, and he had to back out of the race because he was too young to run. He would have been like a few days shy of the birthday he needed to be. He figured that out after the fact because depending on what position you run for, there's age limitations. But yeah, that's somebody who was going to run as a Democrat.
Well,
he does take some anti-imperialist positions, but I don't know all of his positions.
Well, my problem is he's just way too on board with voting for Democrats solving problems.
Yeah, because you know me, I'm a third party guy. So I rarely support a Democrat, but this is somebody that I happen to know, and we share some views on foreign policy.
Well, no, I understand. I don't support a lot of Democrats either. There are a handful of Democrats that I still have any use for, and none of them are in office. They're all running against people.
Insurgent
candidates. Hate to cut you guys off, but it's time for me to go to bed.
Yeah, I understand. Jory's going to bow out tonight.
Well, you're proof, Jory, that you can't brainwash them all, right? You left the evangelical camp, and that was good for you.
That's true. And I also left neoliberal camp.
Yes, twice.
After 4 years.
Well, I mean, once you break out of brainwashing, you can't really fit into a new brainwashing mold. It's hard.
At least I hope you learn your lesson. I mean,
if you really,
and you got to be reminded. But
people trash being woke all the time. But if you're really woke, you can't go back to sleep for the Democrats.
No, not for anyone.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us, Jory. You have a great night. Get some sleep.
Love y'all. Good night.
Love you. Night.
Night.
So, what do we have?
Your position on Adam is kind of like Ryan Grimm's, right? You respect some of his journalism, his advocacy of Assange, but you don't like that he's too much in line with Democratic partisanship, right?
Well, I mean, I think he's a little too, I'm trying to think of the way to put it. I think he's a little too pro-Democrat, definitely, or at least he was. I don't know. Maybe he's changed since then. I'm glad he's got a good position on Venezuela.
Because I can tell you, and I've met him a few times in Gainesville. I can tell you that, and that's not too far from where I'm at. That I asked him when he was running for Attorney General, which is a statewide position, do you want to be taken off as co-founder? He said no. So that shows that he's principled. Even when he's running for a statewide position, he doesn't care to be associated with anti-imperialism.
To be fair, it would not surprise me to find out that he's one of those people who's much less of an asshole in person than on Twitter.
Oh, I mean, in person meeting him, you can see he's got charisma. And I'm not saying everybody with charisma is great, but a lot of his political positions are progressive, especially on foreign policy.
Sure. There are people who I actually still kind of like, even though I don't agree with them. And there are people who I agree with on a lot and I still don't like.
I can debate somebody and still like them in the end. We have some differences. I mean, the best debates are where you find common ground. Caleb and I, for example, when we debate each other, Caleb Maupin, we found some common ground. And a couple of times recently, we've been on shows, me talking about Venezuela, him talking about Russia or whatever. Where like I was literally coming on right after him, or he was coming on right before me, and we don't talk anymore. We don't talk anymore. It had nothing to do with the debate. We got an argument later on.
Sure,
but I'm just saying debates are good when you find common ground.
They can be, but they can also be. They can also be a real waste of time. And certain kinds of debates are not healthy to have in the first place. For instance, when you debate a Nazi, you're saying that exterminating other peoples is a matter that's suitable for debate in the first place.
Well, probably what the debate would be
exterminating other people is a suitable matter for debate.
Probably what the debate would be ideological debate, And there are a lot of people that are
ultimately that's the ideology.
Well, let me explain. There are a lot of people that are undecided about politics that they might convert over to their side, that might join an alt-right or fascist or Nazi group. And if they hear debate and have their views completely exposed and shown for the lunacy that they are, that could bring them over to our camp instead.
It's important to remember that everybody saw Trump's lunacy. It wasn't a secret. People made excuses for it if they wanted Trump to win.
Mm-hmm.
Hitler. So it cannot be overstressed enough what a bold free speech warrior Hitler was when he was out of power. Hitler was always complaining about being censored. The Nazis would run posters that showed a drawing of Hitler gagged, saying that the state forbids us from speaking. They don't want us to tell you the truth. And it was like all these right-wingers who say, I've been canceled, but they're making all this money off of other right-wingers.
It's opportunism.
Yes. And
they want the right to free speech to take away yours. But those are all things that can be brought up in the debate.
Because and it's really important to understand Nazis are not making an intellectual argument. They're not trying to change your mind. They're trying to win over your heart. Because
they use emotion, yeah.
They use emotion. What's insidious about Nazism is that Nazism isn't about making you hate the people that Nazis hate, because that's the hard part. Nazism is about making you like the Nazis, so you feel like the people the Nazis hate are being mean to the Nazis, and you start to share the Nazis' victim complex. And that's how you grow to actually hate the people the Nazis hate. It's very insidious. It's all about winning over your sympathy through your desire to care about people and your desire to see the good in people.
But don't all types of groups do things like that? For example, me as a socialist, I want to convince people that the bourgeois forces and the reactionary forces and the capitalist forces of our society are doing destructive things. And part of my way to do that, I'd love to appeal to logic and intellect, but at the same time, I could say, look, these are these terrible acts of persecution that these right-wing or capitalist forces have done. And look at what I'm trying to advocate for: the working class, a betterment of society, a better future. So as part of that persuasion, the Greeks called it pathos and logos. Pathos is emotion, logos is logic. They use both to try to persuade, and sometimes leftists use both too. Maybe it's more pathos for the fascists, but
I'm not saying that there's no place for pathos. I'm saying the entire Nazi argument is all about using your sympathy for them against you.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the people who felt sorry for Hitler got killed.
The Jews were the last people he went after because they had a lot of economic power and they had to do a number of things before they could persecute
even
them.
more than that.
He went after the trade unionists, the gays, the male gays.
There is a pattern.
Communists, etc.
Nazis never go after their real target first.
Right.
The first step is always to go after all the people who might protect the real target.
Right.
So the first people that the Nazis went after in Germany were the communists, because both the Social Democrats and the German conservatives on the right hated the communists for different reasons.
And also, a lot of the communists hated the Social Democrats. I mean, look what they did to Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg.
The Social Democrats had created a self-justifying mythology about why the communists were bad in order to feel better about what they did, essentially.
Yeah, they had to justify what they did. I mean, it was a right-wing military unit that committed the acts of assassination, but they were doing it at the behest of a social democratic government.
They were doing it at the personal behest of a social democratic president who had authorized the formation of these groups to get around the military limits set by the Treaty of Versailles. So the very first president of the new German Republic was bringing right-wingers into the political and police establishment in order to get around the limitations on the military.
So when Nick Bronner talks about a left-right alliance, that's what I think of. I think of how the Social Democrats had united with the right and the disastrous consequences of that. Yes. I mean, I am about unity and solidarity of the working class and the progressive working class elements, but to talk about our left-right alliance and take those positions and then take the anti-oppression out of it and, ignore the other issues that, like, even pretty much center-left issues by California standards, like reparations. For MPP and Nick to take those positions, that's very dangerous.
Well, I mean, and that's the whole thing, is they're basically saying, we're not going to do anything that might make the Republicans angry by standing up for any oppressed people who aren't like us.
And even though Nick is Chilean, he's a white Chilean. There's Chileans that are Mapuche, that have indigenous blood. There's Chileans that are Afro-Chileans. My great grandmother was Chilean. I'm aware of its history. And Nick is one of those white elite type of Chileans that grew up in the United States. So he hasn't really identified with. I don't think he speaks Spanish either.
There was a whole legal racial classification system that was the caste system of Spanish America during the colonial period, and actual Spaniards from Spain were always at the top.
Yes, most Latin Americans are mestizo, so they have both indigenous and Spanish blood. But then there were Zambos who had Afro and indigenous blood, so they categorized them. All those categories came from the Spanish Empire in the Americas.
Number 2 on the list was what the Spaniards, and called Creoles, who were of pure European Spanish blood, but born in the Americas.
Yeah, you were still a second-class citizen. Like Simon Bolivar, his parents were Spaniards or descended from Spaniards. He was technically a Creole or Criollo. But he was still considered a second-class citizen. You were a third-class citizen if you were a mestizo.
The whole central,
and even worse if you were indigenous or black.
The whole central issue of the original Bolivarian revolutions and of San Martin's revolutions and of the Mexican Revolution were all more political rights and economic rights for Creoles. It wasn't something that was on behalf, for the most part, of mestizos or indigenous
when
people.
It comes to Bolivar, I don't agree with that. And I know more about the Bolivarian Revolution than the Mexican Revolution. I know the Bolivarian Revolution came first and influenced the Mexican Revolution. But I can tell you, for example, Tupac Amaru II, who was a Peruvian Inca leader who was fighting the Spaniards and almost won. Had he taken Cusco quicker, he would have won. And so he was captured and executed brutally by the Spaniards and lost that indigenous rebellion. And he was a descendant of Tupac Amaru I from a couple centuries prior that also had an Inca rebellion against the Spaniards in Peru and in Bolivia, etc. And so when Tupac Amaru II came around in the late 1700s and was crushed, but soon after that, Bolivar emerged. Bolivar didn't live that long. I believe he died in his early 40s. And Bolivar wanted the indigenous people of Venezuela, his nation, to rise up alongside the Creoles and actually abolish slavery. So he wanted the Afro and the indigenous people to get rights and the Spaniards to get out. So that's what he had to his advantage. Tupac Amaru II was mostly just indigenous people fighting alongside him. What Bolivar had to his advantage, and part of the reason why he was successful, is because he wanted all the non-Spanish forces to unite.
But ultimately, whether Bolivar was to blame or not, and I'm not assigning personal blame, I'm just talking about historical consequences. Ultimately, the first Bolivarian revolution put Creole elites in power.
Well, what happened to Bolivar? Where did he die?
Mm-hmm.
You know where he died?
That was in Venezuela, wasn't it?
No, he was exiled. He was exiled by those same elites that you just mentioned, and he was dying of tuberculosis. He was trying to get to Europe, and he was in Santa Marta on the coast of Colombia. He was going to board a vessel to get out of the Americas because he was being, persecuted by the very people that he liberated. So he was betrayed and exiled and disgraced, and he was trying to recover from his tuberculosis, but just the emotional decline resulted in a physical decline, and he died before he could complete his exile. So yeah, he was punished by some of the people that he freed, in particular the Creole elites, because he wanted to advocate for the continual abolition of slavery and the freedom of the indigenous people.
And that's a good
Chavez was inspired by that because Chavez was Zambo in Spanish. Chavez had Afro and indigenous blood and Spanish blood, and he felt as like a disciple of Bolivar that he had to complete the revolution.
And when he became president, and when he initially made the decrees and signed the legislation that gave Afro-Venezuelans and indigenous Venezuelans full voting rights, that was a huge deal. That was the first time they had full citizenship rights since Bolivar was exiled.
Yeah, that's one of the things they did in Mexico later too. By the time of the Mexican-American War, slavery had been abolished in Mexico. And one of the express reasons of the United States for invading Mexican land, which is now the Southwest U.S., is because they needed more land for slaves.
Well, James Russell Lowell wrote in an essay in Harper's Weekly, they just want this California to drag more slave states in, to abuse you and to scorn you, and to plunder you like sin. That was the general attitude towards the Mexican War in the North. The Whigs, who won an election pledging to stop the war, lost power because they opposed the war too aggressively and were voted out of Congress.
Ralph Waldo Emerson opposed to the Mexican-American War as well.
Abraham Lincoln lost re-election to his only term in Congress because he opposed the Mexican War too loudly and patriotic.
Yeah, besides him, Ralph Waldo Edison? Was he intellectual then that opposed it?
He was against it. Lots of people were against it. James Russell Lowell and Ralph Waldo Emerson were friends. Yeah. They were part of the same.
Oh, I didn't know they knew each other. Okay.
And Stephen Greenleaf Whittier and several other famous literati of the time. Ralph Waldo Emerson was also separately friends with Nathaniel Hawthorne, though they disagreed about politics. And Herman Melville was their neighbor and very much wanted to be friends with Nathaniel Hawthorne, but Nathaniel Hawthorne didn't like Herman Melville.
Yeah, because often these wars in the United States are described as having few anti-war voices. But there was Americans opposing the Spanish-American War, the Mexican-American War, not just Vietnam. For example, there was several African-American soldiers during the Philippine conflict, during the Spanish-American War, that defected to the Filipino side.
Yes.
And of course, there was Irish people who became U.S. citizens by joining the armed forces that defected to the Mexican side. So it wasn't always, and they tended to cover this up in history, but there wasn't always a monolith of Americans getting behind these wars.
There were people who were strongly opposed to the War of 1812. Opposition to the War of 1812 is what really finally annihilated the Whigs.
Wasn't the War of 1812 defensive, though? Like the British wanted to control us again? It was defensive, right? I mean, they burned down the White House.
No, it was not defensive.
Okay.
The United States
wanted to make Canada
a reason to go to war with England. Jefferson, though he didn't do it as president, had very much wanted to go to war with England when Washington was president. in support of revolutionary France. And he advocated for supporting Napoleon.
You said revolutionary France or Friends?
France.
Yeah, I knew Jefferson was involved with France, yeah.
Yes. Jefferson was very pro-Napoleon early on, though he became less so later.
Well, even it was named Alexander, that German guy who was in South America. You know what I'm talking about? The very famous scientist from Germany, Alexander something or other, who was around during Napoleon's time, who traveled through South America.
I think I know who you mean. I cannot remember his name, but
yeah, but that guy, he also supported Napoleon in the beginning and then opposed him.
Well, there are lots of people who changed their minds about Napoleon when he started calling himself emperor.
Boulevard didn't like Napoleon either, and we're talking about the first Napoleon, just in case. Yeah.
Well, no, the first Napoleon had lots of people who didn't like him, but yeah, Napoleon and Bonaparte and Bolivar were contemporaries. But yeah, where was I?
Von Humboldt.
Yeah, von Humboldt. That's
Alexander von Humboldt. Yeah.
But yeah, we had gotten off track. But anyway,
we're talking about Americans that opposed our different wars.
Yes, Americans that opposed our.
And you're talking about Jefferson and how he
Jefferson.
Yeah.
Jefferson Jefferson and his entire party were against the quasi-war with France when John Adams was president. The Federalists and the entire party, except President Adams, wanted a war with France. President Adams lost the White House primarily because he lost the support of his own party by secretly making peace with France behind their backs instead of going to war. And then the big one, of course, is still during the Mexican War, the entire
1812, did the United States try to invade Canada?
The United States tried to invade Canada.
So that aspect of it was offensive. Okay, I had forgotten that.
And the United States also invaded Spanish Florida because Spain was an English ally. Invading Florida was the original reason, more than anything else, for going to war with England. Southerners wanted.
This was before the Louisiana Purchase, correct?
Correct. No, the Louisiana Purchase had already happened. I'm sorry. Louisiana Purchase was under Jefferson, and the War of 1812 was under Madison. My apologies.
But Jefferson took positions on that war. He was still alive then.
Jefferson had positions. Madison and the people who wanted Madison to go to war were going to war because they thought they could take Florida and Canada.
Mm-hmm. In the end, they only got Florida.
In the end, they didn't even get all of Florida. They got a little chunk of the Panhandle.
Right. It took some time.
And then Andrew Jackson would invade Florida on his own initiative later.
Well, yeah, that's why Jacksonville's named Jacksonville. You know?
And the president would make a deal with Spain to buy Florida in order to both save face with the Spanish and to make the people who supported Jackson happy.
Well, yeah, I mean the California Purchase, much like the Florida Purchase, was under the gun. One of the few purchases. I mean, I say never purchased Hawaii. That was just military force. One of the few purchases that we had of a U.S. state where was no threat of the gun was Alaska, which was Russian territory. But besides that, you had purchases that were under threat of the gun, right? There was coercion by the United States.
Well, that's exactly what the Florida Purchase was. Andrew Jackson, on his own authority, invaded and occupied Florida and said it was now American. And James Monroe was going to punish him, but found out that the people who had made him president supported Jackson.
He's the one that made the Monroe Doctrine about Latin America, right?
Yes. And James Monroe then saved face by buying Florida. And
so Andrew Jackson wasn't president yet. But he was a general, right?
Still a general in the Army. Now,
right.
This was one of two situations prior to becoming president where Jackson committed a serious and unequivocal crime.
The Trail of Tears also.
He was that was
when he became president.
Ordered to do then. That was a war crime. That was inhumane.
But let me ask you, Trail of Tears was when he was a general?
Yes.
Okay.
He was governor. He was a military governor of the he was the military governor of the Department of Georgia, and he deported large numbers of Native Americans from Georgia to what is now Oklahoma.
Yeah, like the Seminole language and the Creek language are similar because the Seminoles originated from the Creek tribe in Georgia. So the Seminoles that didn't go along with the Trail of Tears, that fled farther south, the Creek people that fled farther south, they became the Seminoles.
Oh, I know that they joined the Seminoles. There were also Seminoles further south in Florida, but the ones in Georgia were deported, as were a great many from the Panhandle.
Yeah, because they fled along with Osceola to the Everglades, which was an ingenious idea, because they fought three Seminole wars, and every single one the United States lost because they couldn't bring in those cannons in the swamps of the Everglades, and they were able to have successful guerrilla resistance along with runaway slaves who fought alongside the Seminoles there and the Miccosukee people as well.
It's true. And it was support for U.S. settlers in north central Florida, cracker country, so to speak, that led Jackson to invade without permission. That was insubordinate. He was also then ordered to come back and disobeyed the president. So that's two very important military crimes right there.
Why did he get away with it? Over politics?
Politics. He got away with it because Monroe was afraid he would not win re-election if he
he might have feared a military insurrection.
I do not know. That might have been a possibility. That takes me back to Jackson's first clear and unequivocal crime from a military point of view. Jackson, while governor of Tennessee, before Tennessee was a state, while Jefferson was president, conspired with Aaron Burr in Burr's conspiracy to invade Spanish America and create a new country. So Andrew Jackson was one of the Burr traders, to use the point of view of Burr's enemies at the time.
He got away with a lot, didn't he?
Andrew Jackson got away with a lot.
I heard he was an enemy of the banks, but so was Lincoln.
Jackson was not an enemy of the banks. He
was an enemy
of the federal bank.
Oh, okay.
He broke up the federal bank and empowered private banks that were owned by friends of his.
Interesting.
So Jackson was not anti-bank. He was anti-national bank. And he broke up the national bank to empower private bankers the same way that Republicans want to break everything federal up to empower their privateering.
The state rights issue and the privatization issue, they're all related.
Yes. And so it was very much a capitalist coup against central banking, putting it back in the hands of private bankers who are out to make a profit. Because remember, the Bank of the United States was backed by federal money. While it did take depositor money, it was owned by the U.S. government. And its director was responsible to the U.S. government. and had to answer to Congress.
Well, I'm going to be going to bed, brother, but
Yes.
it's a little later here than over at your side of the country. But thanks for having me on. I'm glad we were able to interview her. There were some audio issues, but I think we still got a good couple questions in there. So it was a pleasure, and hopefully we can get. I think we're still waiting to hear back on confirmation, but hopefully we can get Dan Kovalik on the next program. He can talk to us about Latin America and Russia. He's an expert. He's a writer, a professor, and I was with him in Venezuela last year. So.
And I need to get to work on scheduling some future shows myself too. So thanks for bringing it up. And to everyone,
so everybody knows we have shows every Tuesday. Last Tuesday was an exception because you celebrated your birthday. And happy belated birthday to you, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm 45 now. You're
still young.
Yeah. Well, you know, I look at my gray and it helps me remember that I'm not 19 anymore.
I'm 37. I even had a little gray growing in my sideburn. I kind of brought it up a little bit to get rid of the gray.
I have more than a little gray. But yeah, no, everybody, we thank you for joining us. You have a great night. We'll tweet at you. Take care.